What if the man you trusted most turned into your deadliest enemy? And what if facing him meant not just risking your life but your soul? This is the story of Elias Granger, a broken lawman, a haunted past, and a town one heartbeat away from falling into darkness. Stay with us, because once you hear how it ends, you won't ever forget it. The desert never forgets. In the fading light of dusk, when the orange sky melted into purple, and the dry wind whispered like a ghost across the hills, a stagecoach rolled into Tombstone, Arizona. The horses were worn, their sides glistening with sweat. The driver silent as Stone barely glanced at the man who stepped down onto the dusty street. Elias Granger. His boots sank into the grit like they were meant to return. He was lean, sun-scarred, with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a long duster coat that had seen too many battles. There was something in the way he moved, deliberate, like a man trying not to wake a sleeping nightmare. Tombstone had the scent of memory and gunpowder, the kind of town where you could still hear the past if you stood still long enough. Elias knew that scent well. He'd smelled it before years ago, when this place was just another stop on the trail. But now it felt different. He wasn't here to pass through. He was here to face a ghost. He stopped outside the Copper Spur Saloon. Its wooden sign creaked above the porch, and the windows flickered with warm lamplight. Inside, music drifted lazily from a piano half out of tune, and laughter rose and fell like waves against a broken dock. Clara Bell stood behind the bar, her hands busy, but her eyes alert. Her auburn hair was streaked with silver, not from age, but from survival. Every inch of her posture said she didn't take trouble, but she sure knew how to finish it. When Elias stepped in, a hush followed. His presence pulled the air tight, like folks were holding their breath and didn't know why. Clara's gaze found his, and for a long second they just looked at each other. Two people who'd seen the cost of justice. Two people still standing somehow. Miss Belle Elias said finally, voice low and rough, "Heard you might know what's been stirring out here." She didn't smile. "Depends who's asking. Name's Elias Granger, sheriff now. Least that's what the badge says." She raised a brow. "Tombstone, getting desperate?" "Always has been." She poured him a whiskey, slid it down the counter. "You're here for Boone, aren't you?" He flinched at the name, not visibly but enough for Clara to notice. Silas Boone, the kind of name that didn't need introduction. Years ago, they'd ridden together, fought side by side. Brothers, some would have said, until one day Boone crossed a line Elias couldn't follow and never looked back. "He's back," Clara said, her voice carrying weight. 2 nights ago, a stagecoach went down. 3 dead. Driver survived just long enough to say Boone's name before he bled out. Elias set his drink down without sipping. What does he want? She leaned in closer. Same thing he always wanted. Power. Fear. Maybe something personal. The door swung open again. A man in a black coat, silver-studded hat, tilted low, walked in with a gambler's gait and a half-smile. Jedediah Crow. Everyone called him Jed, too smooth, too clean, and far too calm for a man who'd seen what he'd seen. "Evening," he nodded. "Miss Bell, sheriff." Elias didn't return the gesture. "You heard about the coach." Jed's smile faded. "Hard not to. Word is, Boone's boys are setting up camp near the old mines, planning something bigger." Clara crossed her arms. "And you just happened to hear that I've got ears," Jed replied, "and debts I'd like to see paid." The 3 of them stood there, the saloon around them humming like a quiet warning. There was a storm coming. Not the kind you could outrun. The kind that changed everything. Outside, the wind picked up stirring dust into the air. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, and beneath it all, Elias heard the faint echo of a memory gun fire betrayal and the sound of a man riding away while others lay dying. Tombstone was no stranger to blood, but this time Elias knew it might take more than a badge to keep the peace. It might take facing the one man who once called him brother, and now wore the face of a ghost. And so it began. Dawn broke with the kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the land itself was bracing for something wicked. Tombstone, with its creaky boardwalks and faded facades, stirred beneath the rising sun. Folks went about their business with eyes lowered and movements careful as though afraid to disturb the air. News of Silas Boone's return had spread like prairie fire, igniting fear in the hearts of men who'd fought and lost too many battles already. Elias Granger stood before the sheriff's office, hammer in hand, as he drove a wanted poster into the wood. The paper fluttered briefly in the wind before settling. A crude sketch of Boone's face stared back at him with a smirk that hadn't aged a day. Elias stared into that image longer than he should have. Not because he needed to remember Boone's face, but because he couldn't forget it. Across the street, Clara Bell watched from the doorway of the Copper Spur. She crossed her arms not to ward off the chill, but out of old habit, one that surfaced when danger was near. "That won't stop the whispers," she called. Elias didn't look away. Ain't meant to. It's a reminder. To Boone, to everyone. That afternoon brought Jedediah Crow to the sheriff's desk, where he dropped a torn, bloodied cloth with more meaning than words could carry. "Found this near the old trading post," he said. There was blood. Plenty of it. Elias picked it up, fingers tightening. He's making a statement. Jed nodded solemn for once. Boone never liked to just kill. He liked people to remember what he'd done. That night, the saloon filled with the usual crowd, ranch hands, drifters, and townsfolk looking to forget. But the air was heavy, and even the music from the battered piano couldn't lift it. The poker game started late, and Jed joined without his usual flair. Something was wrong. A stranger at the edge of the table kept losing and drinking. When he finally stood, the blade he pulled flashed like lightning. But Jed was faster. The table flipped, shots were fired, and when the smoke cleared, Jed had the man face down on the ground. "Boone knows you're coming," the man hissed through broken teeth. Elias arrived just in time to hear it. Clara didn't flinch. She was used to these games. "He wants you chasing shadows," she said to Elias. "He wants you spread thin. He'll get more than he bargained for." The next morning, word came like a blow to the gut. The town's gold reserve, every last coin saved from taxes trade and toil, was gone. No gunfire, no signs of forced entry. Just empty shelves and a blacksmith named Graham, pale as death, confessing through tears. "They had my little girl," he whispered. "Said they'd send pieces of her if I didn't open the vault." The silence in the sheriff's office was deafening. Elias didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked at Clara. It's time. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the jailhouse. Elias stepped forward, eyes hard, voice clear. "Boone doesn't just want our gold. He wants our fear. He wants us broken before he ever rides into town, but we're not giving it to him." He called for volunteers. Not everyone stepped forward, but the ones who did carried something deeper than courage. Clara, Jed, an old miner named Albie who hadn't held a rifle in years, a schoolteacher with shaky hands but a steady gaze. They all had reasons. They all had losses. That night the posse rode out. The desert swallowed them in twilight, and each hoofbeat was a drum of reckoning. No one spoke much. There was no need. They were bound by something greater than words, grief, anger, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could take back their town. Clara rode beside Elias. "You think we'll find him?" "I don't need to find him," Elias said. "He'll find us, and when he does, I'll be ready." Behind them, Tombstone slept uneasily, its fate hanging in the balance. Ahead, in the shadows of the canyon and the silent whisper of the wind, vengeance waited. And the dust carried the weight of every choice they'd ever made. They weren't riding to catch a man. They were riding to confront the past. They rode into a night without stars, into the belly of a land that had seen too much pain to care about justice anymore. And still they rode because somewhere out there beneath a sky, thick with silence, a reckoning waited that none of them could avoid. The fire of revenge burned low and steady in their hearts, and with each mile the memory of loss grew heavier. What lay ahead wasn't just a gang of outlaws. It was a reminder of every moment they hadn't spoken, every bullet not fired, every wrong left to fester. And they would meet it together with eyes open and guns ready, not because they believed in victory, but because they believed in each other. The past may have broken them once, but now it had given them a reason to fight. There are nights when the stars refuse to shine, when the land itself holds its breath. That was the night Elias Granger and his ragtag posse rode into the Sonoran Desert. They weren't chasing justice. They were chasing the ghosts of their own regrets, led by the fading trail of a man who'd once been family. The silence around them wasn't empty, it was full of memory. The moon hung low, casting pale light across a land carved by time and tragedy. Sand crunched beneath hooves. Owls watched from twisted mesquite trees. Somewhere out there, Boone was watching too. Elias could feel it like a splinter under his skin. They made camp near a dry creek bed. Clara moved quietly, gathering kindling, her eyes distant. Jed knelt near the fire, sharpening his knife with the focus of a man with too many secrets. The others, Albie the miner, June the schoolteacher, Cal the tracker, sat in uneasy silence. Over coffee and jerky, the talk turned to the past. "I used to believe in heroes," June said, staring into the flames. "Taught my students that good always wins. But the day Boone's men burned down our schoolhouse, I stopped telling fairy tales." Albie nodded. "I fought in the war. Thought that'd be the last time I'd hold a gun. Turns out peace don't last in places like this." Elias stirred the embers. "Boone and I made an oath once. Blood brothers, we said. Swore we'd never leave each other behind. Then came the job in Tucson. Gold shipment. We were supposed to guard it. But Boone had other plans." Jed's eyes narrowed. "He killed the guards, took the gold, left you holding the bag." Elias nodded. "Cost me my badge, cost others their lives." There was a silence heavy enough to drown in. Then Clara spoke. "My husband died with a Bible in his hand, and Boone's bullet in his chest. I've waited 10 years for this ride." They slept in shifts, eyes never straying far from the shadows. The desert had a way of swallowing men whole, especially those already halfway gone. By dawn, they found the first sign boot prints leading to a rocky bluff. Cal studied them. 4 men, 1 limping. Headed west, they followed the trail through harsh winds and blistering sun. At midday, a vulture circled overhead. By late afternoon, they found the remains of a wagon, burned, abandoned, and riddled with bullets. In the dirt lay a sheriff's badge cracked in half. Elias picked it up. "Harrison, sheriff out of Mescal. He must have tried to stop them." "They left it there for you," Jed said. A message. They pressed on. That evening, they reached the edge of the Grand Canyon, the great chasm yawning beneath the setting sun. They made camp once more, and as night fell, Clara found Elias staring into the abyss. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Used to come here as a boy. My father said the canyon held the voices of the dead. Told me if I listened hard enough I could hear them speak. Do you? Not voices. Just regrets." She touched his arm, gentle. "We all carry those." The fire crackled behind them. Jed was cleaning his revolver when June sat beside him. "You don't talk much," she said. "Talking don't bring back the dead," he replied. "But remembering them does." Jed sighed. "My father was a marshal. Boone ambushed his camp, burned him alive. I was 12. I spent the next 10 years learning how to shoot. You ever find peace?" "No, but I've learned how to aim." Later, a coyote howled in the distance. The posse lay awake listening to the night breathe. Every shadow felt like a whisper. Every gust of wind a warning. Before dawn, Cal vanished while scouting. They found his body near a dry well throat slit. Elias stood over him, fists clenched. "Boone's letting us know he's close," Jed said. "He's watching us," Clara whispered. Elias nodded. "Then it's time we stopped being prey." They buried Cal beneath a mesquite tree marking the grave with stones. No words were spoken. None were needed. That day they changed course. No longer following tracks, they followed instinct. Elias remembered Boone's habits, the places he'd hide the tricks he favored. By late afternoon, they found a narrow canyon with smoke curling from its mouth. The air was still. Too still. Trap Jed said. "Of course it is," Elias replied, "but it's our only lead." They dismounted and moved on foot, guns drawn. The canyon walls rose high, the sky a thin line above. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. At the bend, they found what they feared a circle of stones, a dying fire, and a crude cross made of rifle barrels. Hanging from it was another wanted poster, Elias's face defaced with blood. "Boone's not just after gold," Clara said. "He's after you." Elias stared at the poster. "Then we stop running. Tomorrow we strike." That night they made camp in silence. The air felt heavier. The fire burned lower. As they settled in, Elias pulled a worn letter from his coat. A letter from Boone, years old, never opened. He finally tore it open. The handwriting was sharp angry. "You left me, Elias. You let them take me while you ran. You wore the badge, but I wore the scars. Now you'll know what that feels like." Elias folded it and placed it in the fire. The flames devoured it. "We ride at dawn," he said. And in the hush that followed, every soul there knew this wasn't just about Boone anymore. It was about reckoning, it was about redemption, and it was about time. They came at dawn just as the first light began to crawl across the ridges of the Dragoon Mountains, where the shadows still clung to stone, and the air hung thick with the memory of the night. The trail leading to the abandoned mining town was tight and treacherous, winding like a snake through rock and dust. Boot Hill stood as a grim reminder ahead, its crooked crosses stabbing up from the hard earth, each one marking a story finished too soon. But the story they came to write wasn't finished. Not yet. Elias Granger led the group forward, his shoulders squared with a quiet resolve, born of sorrow, betrayal, and the years between. Clara Bell rode just behind her hand, never straying far from the rifle slung across her back. Jedediah Crow brought up the flank, eyes sharp, scanning the cliffs for movement. Every rider in that posse had known loss, and every one of them had come here for something that couldn't be put into words. The town itself was a skeleton of its former self. The buildings, weather-beaten and half-collapsed, seemed to lean in as if whispering warnings. Somewhere inside those shadows, Boone's men waited just as they had planned. And they didn't wait long. The first shot cracked like thunder. It took down the lead horse of one of the townsfolk riding alongside Clara. Panic rippled, but not for long. Elias dismounted, rolling behind a rusted ore cart, and returned fire with cold precision. Jed darted into the broken remnants of a blacksmith shop, taking up a sniper's perch. Clara was already pulling the wounded man to cover. The fight had begun. From every angle came the sound of gunfire. Boone's men had fortified their positions using the mining town's layout to their advantage, but they hadn't counted on the fury riding against them. Clara's voice rang out above the shots, organizing the defense with calm authority. Jed, flanking left, took out 3 snipers before they could reload. Albie and June, battle-worn but determined, covered the rear, keeping the townsfolk together and firing back. Elias charged forward, cutting through the old general store. He found traps, barrels of powder rigged to explode windows wired with trip lines. He disarmed them quickly, fingers steady despite the rising tension in his chest. He knew Boone's style, knew his traps, and still something felt different. Boone wasn't just laying defenses. He was telling a story, one filled with rage, heartbreak, and maybe a twisted kind of longing. A dynamite blast rocked the east side of town, shaking the earth. Dust and debris rained down. One of the young townsmen was thrown off his feet. June dragged him behind a water trough, bandaging a nasty cut across his forehead. "We either die running, or we stand and finish this," she said through clenched teeth. And finish it they did. Clara led a squad through the church ruins. Inside, they found Boone's lieutenants, ruthless men with dead eyes. Clara didn't hesitate. One by one, they fell until only one remained. He raised his hands, grinning. "You're too late," he said. "Boone's ready for him." Elias made his way to the old saloon, the heart of the town. His boots echoed on the wooden steps. The door creaked open with a sound that split the silence like a scream. Boone stood at the far end, exactly where Elias had imagined he'd be silhouetted in the window's orange glow. He looked older, leaner, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dulled. It burned hotter. "I knew you'd come," Boone said. "I came to end this. You already ended it. Years ago, when you left me to rot. You betrayed us all." Boone laughed low and bitter. "I gave you a way out, but you always wanted to be the hero. You gave me a reason to come back." They stood still for a breathless moment. Then the guns were up. The room exploded in light and sound. Boone's shot grazed Elias's shoulder. Elias's bullet found Boone's side. The outlaw staggered his back against the piano. "Do it," Boone rasped, clutching his side. Elias stared at him, the years flashing by like lightning. "No, you're still a coward. I'm not here for vengeance." Downstairs, Clara and Jed had cleared the last of Boone's men. They burst into the saloon just as Elias holstered his gun. Boone collapsed to his knees. Jed stepped forward. "You letting him live?" Elias nodded. "He'll face trial. Let the law decide what he never could." They dragged Boone out into the daylight. The fighting had stopped. Smoke hung low in the air. The townsfolk gathered as Elias lifted Boone by the collar, showing them the man who had haunted them for so long. Clara helped bind his wounds. "He's not a ghost anymore," she said. "He's just a man." The town buried their dead that evening right on the hill that bore so many names already. Elias carved a fresh marker not for Boone, but for the memories that wouldn't rest. "I came here to stop a man," Elias whispered to the grave, "but I found pieces of myself I thought were gone." Clara stood beside him, eyes moist. We all did. Jed walked up, silent-handed Elias a flask. "To peace." Elias took a sip, then stared at the horizon. "To what comes after?" That night, under the vast desert sky, the stars returned. They weren't brighter than usual, but for the first time in years they seemed to shine on a town not bracing for war, but ready for healing. And in Boot Hill, the echoes of gunfire faded at last, giving way to the softer, longer echoes of stories finally told. Elias rode out at dawn alone. No one stopped him. No one needed to. Some men ride to escape their past. He rode to honor it. And in the silence that followed, Tombstone breathed again. It had earned it. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden rays over the battered streets of Tombstone, and still the silence hung thick, a silence not of fear, but of reflection. The battle was over. The blood had dried, yet the true reckoning had only begun. Some said that once justice was served, the land would find peace again. But peace does not return easily to places carved by grief. It must be chosen, built from the ashes, nail by nail, heart by heart. A week after the dust settled at Boot Hill, Tombstone bore the look of a place determined to rise. Boards were pulled from windows. Smoke-stained walls were scrubbed. The chapel bell rang again, its sound thin but proud. Beneath this work, however, ran a deeper current. Grief, gratitude, and something more enduring, legend. Elias Granger had stayed. He walked the town not like a sheriff, but like a witness to what had been lost and reclaimed. He mended fences with townsfolk, ate breakfast with orphans at Clara's makeshift kitchen, and sat for long hours on the porch of the jailhouse, watching life return in slow, cautious steps. His badge remained tucked in his pocket, but his presence, his quiet strength, was more commanding than any metal star. Clara Bell, for her part, transformed the copper spur into a haven. The rear of the saloon now housed bookshelves, a place for children to learn their letters, and a long table where the lonely shared stories over supper. The front still served drinks because some traditions held towns together, but the laughter that returned there wasn't forced. It was hard-earned, and that made it honest. Jedediah Crow, ever the restless spirit, lingered longer than anyone thought he would. He fixed the bell tower at the church. He showed teenagers how to clean and oil a rifle. He even taught poker to a widow who lost her husband to Boone's gang and didn't cheat once. When the wind finally called him away, he didn't announce it. He simply left a card behind on Elias's desk. The Queen of Spades, cleaned this time, pressed between two newspaper clippings, one of the siege, the other of Clara's new school. Before Boone was transported, Elias visited him in the cell. Boone looked small, almost ordinary. Time and consequence had reduced the menace to something frail. There was no fury in his eyes, only fatigue. "You came to finish me?" Boone asked. "No," Elias said. "That part of me died at Boot Hill." Boone smiled bitterly. "You'll never forget what we were." "No," Elias agreed. "But I can choose what I carry forward." They didn't speak again. Later that week, Elias stood at Boot Hill, hammering a wooden plank into the ground where a nameless fighter had fallen. He carved the word honor with the same care he once gave to every shot fired in the field. Clara joined him there, holding a white flower. He had no family, she asked. "Just us," Elias replied. They stood in the silence that only old souls can share. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Clara turned to Elias. "Will you stay?" Elias shook his head slowly. "This town doesn't need a shadow hanging over it. It needs light." "You were that light, Elias?" "I was a match," he said. "Now it needs a flame." The morning he left the town gathered not in sadness, but in something close to reverence. Clara gave a speech that was simple and strong like her. This town will not forget, because remembering is how we heal. June, the schoolteacher, read from Psalms. The children scattered wildflowers into the well. Elias, dressed in a worn coat, his hat tilted low, stood beside his horse with a saddlebag full of letters, some from townsfolk, others unaddressed. Letters he'd never read, but promised to deliver to someone, somewhere. That was his way. Clara came to him last. She placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. "Wherever you ride, make sure they know our story," she said. "I will," he promised. Jed waited by the tree line, arms crossed the wind, playing with his coat. When Elias mounted, they shared a look. No words, no need. He rode out under a sky streaked with gold. He didn't turn around, he didn't need to. Years passed. Tombstone rebuilt itself not into what it once was, but into something stronger. The Copper Spur became a shelter, a school, and still the best watering hole west of the San Pedro. The children told tales under the desert stars of the sheriff who came from nowhere and changed everything. They spoke of Clara Bell, the woman who never flinched. Of Jed, the gambler who chose justice over luck. Boot Hill remained sacred ground. But one grave marker stood out, not because it was grand, but because it never bore a name. Every spring a fresh white flower appeared there. No one ever saw who left it, but everyone believed they knew, and that was enough. Because some men don't fade into the dust. Some men ride beyond the edge of the map, beyond time, and in the hush between stories told by firelight and old men sipping coffee at dawn you'll still hear his name, Elias Granger. He was not just a lawman, he was a legend, and in Tombstone, legends never die. The story of Elias Granger is more than just the tale of a lone sheriff who rode into a town teetering on the brink of chaos. It is the story of redemption carved out of the harsh terrain of the Old West, a journey through betrayal, justice, grief, and ultimately healing. From the moment he stepped off that stagecoach in Tombstone with a quiet fire in his eyes and a past too heavy to speak aloud, Elias became something larger than a man. He became a symbol. Elias didn't arrive to be a savior. He came to settle a score, to right a wrong that had haunted him since the day Silas Boone, his brother-in-arms, chose a path of destruction. But what began as a quest for personal closure evolved into a greater fight. It became about the town, about the innocent, about making sure no one else bore the cost of his past. Alongside Clara Bell and Jedediah Crow, Elias forged a path not only of gunfire and strategy, but of trust, humility, and conviction. In every moment of that story, when the town's gold was stolen, when the posse rode into the desert, when blood was spilled at Boot Hill, Elias stood not as a man seeking glory, but as one determined to restore what had been broken. His strength wasn't in his aim, though it was deadly. It was in his willingness to bear the weight of others' hope, even as he carried the burden of his own regrets. He didn't have to face Boone. He could have walked away. Let the past be the past. But true character is not revealed in ease, it's revealed in choice. Elias chose to confront the darkness he once ran from. He chose to hold Boone accountable, not with vengeance, but with law. And in that choice, he gave Tombstone something it hadn't had in years, a future. Clara Bell's transformation of the Copper Spur into a shelter for the grieving, the lost, and the next generation was no accident. It was born of that same spirit Elias reawakened in all of them, the belief that healing, though painful, is possible. Jed's silent departure was not an escape, but a continuation. He understood that legends do not settle. They keep riding, carrying the torch for those left behind. The legacy Elias left behind wasn't written in stone or sung by bards. It was whispered in the quiet morning light in the stories passed from grandparent to grandchild in the unseen hands who still left a flower each spring on that nameless grave at Boot Hill. What he left was a reminder that we are all more than our worst mistakes. That redemption, though costly, is worth the fight. The lesson in Elias's story. What can we take from Elias Granger's journey and apply to our own lives here and now? It is this. No matter how far we've fallen or how long we've carried our mistakes, we can choose differently. We can stand up. We can face the past not to be defined by it, but to rise above it. Life will give us battles. We will be hurt, betrayed, misunderstood. But how we respond defines who we are. Will we become bitter like Boone, hardened by pain? Or will we, like Elias, become a beacon for others, even when we ourselves feel broken? The world today is different from Tombstone's dust-blown streets, but the need for courage, compassion, and conscience remains. You might not wear a badge, you might not carry a rifle, but every day you choose how to show up for yourself, for your family, for your community. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to fight, but to forgive. Not to conquer, but to understand. Let Elias's story remind you that it's never too late to do what's right. That you can be the one who stops a cycle, who protects the vulnerable, who dares to begin again. Because legends aren't born, they're made choice by choice, moment by moment. Help us keep the legends alive. If you found meaning in this story, if Elias's journey stirred something in you, then help us keep sharing these tales. Subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you the stories of courage, redemption, and the untold heroes of the Wild West. Every click, every share, every word of encouragement gives us the strength to ride on, just like Elias did. Legends never die, and with your support, neither will the stories that deserve to be told. Thank you for riding with us.